Education call meeting to order at this time. And we will have our invocation by Ms. Roosevelt Smith-Gray.
Can we go ahead? Father God, we just want to take this opportunity to thank you. We thank you for this day. This is a day that you have made, and we're going to thank you and rejoice in this day. And you know how we thank you for this meeting. We thank you for what is for. We thank you for our future. We thank you for our school in advance. And we thank you for Rob and everybody that's coming along to help us understand what we need to understand. Thank you for our leader, Deborah Dallas, and we appreciate her. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
We will continue with our agenda and I turn it over now to our superintendent.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. It's exciting.
Thank you.
So as we move through our process with the goal of building a new high school, we want to just kind of make sure we all stay on the same page as we move through the process. So remember last month, we selected our architect after doing our request for proposal or qualifications. And so we've been named. We did end up getting the 30 million on top of the 10 million. So we're getting closer to that number that we need. And so the next part of the process is basically to identify our procurement method for the construction. So we've asked Ron Malone, who has been extremely helpful to me learning the building a new school idea. And he's going to kind of walk through the construction methods. And basically talk about the advantages and disadvantages of both to hopefully help us come to a decision by the end of this meeting as to which way we want to proceed as we work through the construction. Okay, so Rod, I'm going to turn it over to you, okay?
All right, perfect. Thank you. So for those of you who were originally, or back when we did Sandy Grove, I was the lawyer that helped the board there and helped the county commissioners to work on that project. That method, that contracting method was new, as you may recall at the time. It's really only been used a couple of times across the state since then, maybe. Jones County did a very similar project that resulted in a developer building a building and then leasing it back to the school system. So that was a unique method that doesn't get used often, but it has been effective in both places where it was used. On this particular project, we're looking at some of the more conventional methods for building a building. As Dr. Dallas just mentioned, you've already selected an architect. And you don't necessarily have to pick a method right now, but if you are going to use the method that we are recommending to you, which is construction management at risk, getting the construction manager at risk under contract earlier in the process makes sense. So that's kind of why we're here today. There are effectively, let's see what my slides say. How many methods are there? So back when I started doing this, so many years ago, the only method available to owners is what they call multi-pronged bidding. That's still available as an option today. Not many owners use it, certainly on a new project. But it's kind of how it all started. And well, let me back up one other step. So in North Carolina, if you are going to use construction management at risk, the statute requires you to kind of review all of the methods available. And after you've reviewed them all, to then decide that that's the method you want to use. So part of this presentation is to review these other methods so that you will be able to honestly say that we did look at them all, we did talk through them all. And if you find one that you like better than what we're recommending, that's fine too. But we are going to kind of walk through at least all the major ones, talk about those. And then we'll talk a little bit about why we believe construction management at risk is probably the best option for you on this project. So in the earliest of days, the only way to bid a project was in what they call multi-pronged bidding. And it kind of predates this slide in a way, but it was multi-pronged, and that would be where the owner would basically hire 4 separate contractors and cross their finger and hope that, that everything will work out. And I can tell you, it rarely worked out, but you would hire a general contractor, you would hire the plumber, you would hire the mechanical contractor, you hire the electrical contractor. And while the general contractor was tasked with overseeing and coordinating and scheduling, they didn't have the contractual ability to really make the other 3 contractors do what needed to be done. So there'd be a lot of finger pointing, and they often ended up in the middle of these disputes. And, there's a lot of defaults back in those days just because of, projects just seemed to go awry. The legislature then allowed what now would be kind of the base method, because very few people, while that method is still allowed for multi-pronged bidding, it's rarely ever used. So they changed it in the early mid-90s maybe to allow what they call now single-pronged bidding. And under single-pronged bidding, you hire a single general contractor, and that general contractor hires the mechanical contractor, the plumbing contractor, and the electrical contractor. This method is probably how 80% of school buildings or public buildings are built in North Carolina. It's the go-to method. It is way better than multi-pronged bidding. There's a single point of contact. The general contractor controls everything. When owners choose this method, the one thing that I encourage them to do is to not simply award to the low number. I mean, a lot of people feel beholden to the low number. It's a $20 million project, somebody's $100,000 low on the project, and they feel like they have to award to the low number. Well, the statute allows you to award to the lowest responsive and responsible contractor, taking into consideration time, quality, et cetera. And we do encourage owners to do some due diligence in reviewing the qualifications of the low bidder. Because it's way better to spend a little time there and to reject a bidder that you're not comfortable with than it is to award to the low number and have issues down the road. So if you were to choose single prime contracting, that is certainly something that we would recommend. I do a lot of this work across the state. Obviously, I know most of the players, the good and the bad, and can certainly help Dr. Dallas and the architect in that evaluation process to bring a recommendation to you that someone that we would have confidence can get the job done if you choose single prime bidding. The downside in single prime bidding for your particular project is that because you're going to try to build a school on an active school site, there's a lot of scheduling and coordination aspects of this that if you could, well, I tell you what, this will make it more complicated. So anyway, I'll talk about the pros and cons in a second because it'll make more sense in a second. So single prime bidding is the staple. It's, it's the workhorse, so to speak. It's the one that most people use for most projects. A new statute, relatively speaking, is design, bid, build. Well, let me back up for a second. So you don't have to change the slide. So the other thing about the main statute that we were just talking about is that what happens on those projects is that your architect designs the building, creates construction documents, kind of in a vacuum by himself or herself, creates these documents, and then you put it on the street, so to speak, to bid it. there's not much collaboration there's no real collaboration between the architect and the contracting community about the documents. There's no discussion about them. There's no, is this a good idea or a bad idea? It's just what the architect believes to be the best way to proceed. And that's one of the reasons why we're going to be recommending a different method here, but that's a point about that kind of design that I think is important. This new version is designed, bid, build. I shouldn't call it a new version. This slide describes that process and the pros and the cons that go along with the idea that you're going to design the project, you're going to bid it, and then build it. I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time on this slide. It outlines for you the advantages are that theoretically it's cheaper. Many people will tell you that construction management at risk, which is the one we're going to be recommending, is a little more expensive, and when we get to that one, I'll explain why they would say that. But there are also people who would argue to you that it's not more expensive. But you know, the advantages of that process are noted in this slide. You know, ease of implementation, owner controls the design and construction quality, but many of these things that people would highlight as an advantage, these advantages carry across many of the other contracting methods. So I would not look at this like, oh, in order to get these advantages, you have to use this method. It's just these are the things that come along with this method, if that makes sense. Next slide. So construction manager at risk is if we were doing this chronologically, would be the method that was made available to owners after single prime. So when we got into single prime construction, while that was significantly better than multi-prime, it did not allow owners the ability to deal with complicated projects in a way in which other states allowed. So North Carolina ultimately adopted and has allowed owners to use construction management at risk. And the way that construction management at risk works, I'm going to talk about it kind of big picture wise, the way it's supposed to work, and then we'll talk about it, how it literally works in North Carolina, because North Carolina's implementation of the statute over time has not followed kind of the national model. But what is supposed to happen with construction management at risk is you hire a contractor, and they're called the construction manager, and there are lots of them out there now that prefer this method and that do this method almost exclusively when they can. But you would hire in the early stages of the project, like now, a contractor that is going to oversee and manage your project. The contractor hires all of the subcontractors that will do the work. The construction manager in North Carolina can't really do any of the work other than in some isolated exceptions, and that is intended to be in your best interest. So the idea is that they hire all subcontractors to do the work. They can't self-perform, so to speak. They bid that work in a normal way, and you get to see those bids, and you'll know those prices. You'll know exactly what's in each of the packages if you care, and you can really see what the building's costing you at a level that you normally don't see it. You would negotiate a fee with the general contractor, which is effectively their profit. Typically, a project of this size, you're probably going to be in the 2.5% to 3% to 3.25% range of just fee. That's kind of their profit. And then you will negotiate what we call general conditions, and that's the cost to be on the site to manage the project. So that's the cost of their superintendent, the cost of their trailer, the cost of electricity, the cost of water, everything that it costs for them to just be on the project and to oversee it, that's part of that cost. It may be $80,000 a month or $85,000 a month. And, you know, if this is a high school, it's probably gonna be a 2-year project, so you'd multiply that times 24 months, and it would be something in that range is what you would pay. But this will be all negotiated, all above board, all kind of open book. You know what's in this number, what's not in the number. And the construction manager, what's great about this process when it works like it's supposed to work, is that the construction manager and the architect kind of start the project at about the same time. And the construction manager works with the architect on constructability issues. So when they're looking at building this room, you know, the construction manager may say, you know, Mr. Architect, if this is just a straight wall, we can build it much quicker than this little thing here. I understand that this is a nice little design feature, but, you know, we can save money if it's just a straight wall. Or, you know, the idea is that you've got above the ceiling, if we do it this way, it'll be cheaper and we can do it quicker. All those conversations are occurring during the design, to help you get the best project at the best cost. I mean, often there are conversations about like where to locate the building. Sometimes the architect and the owner were planning to build at X. The construction manager will say, well, look, I mean, these soils are bad. If we move it over here and build it here, if you don't mind, you know, we can save time, save money. So all those things are theoretically occurring during the design process, with the idea being that you're going to get the most efficiently constructed building at the cheapest cost. It is supposed to, and often does, reduce the number of change orders that occur during the project because the architect and the designer, the architect and the contractor are looking at the documents and working through some of those decisions, you know, and inconsistencies in the documents and trying to clean all that up, you know, beforehand. So the construction manager owes the owner a fiduciary duty to look out for your best interest. And the national model, the reason that it's called construction manager at risk is that in other places, the construction manager will give you a hard price for the building at some point during the design. And, you know, they would say in this case, you know, okay, your price is $65 million for this new school. And then they become at risk in the event that it really costs $67 million, they eat the $2 million. If they can do it for $63 million, then there's often a discussion within those contracts about how that savings gets shared. So the idea for them is to tell you 65, have you agreed to 65, try to build it for 63, and have an agreement with you that, you know, you'll split the savings 50-50. So it motivates them to get it under that number. You're happy because it's under the number that you've chosen, and you get some money back and they get some money back, and it's a model that works. The reason that North Carolina doesn't implement it quite this way is that when the statute was first enacted, we were in a highly inflationary market, and we're kind of repeating the market now. And when the market was skyrocketing, people were nervous about locking in a price early, right? And what owners at the time were concerned about is, well, the CM is going to try to force us to give up a lot of scope to meet a dollar amount. And, you know, we may give up all the scope and then it bids way under that dollar amount and we didn't get the building that we wanted, or it's more complicated to then get the building that we wanted. So what North Carolina's model from an implementation perspective has become is that most owners, certainly on the school side, don't set the guaranteed maximum price until after the CM has bid the project. So what happens in North Carolina most of the time is that the CM, we work through all of the design pieces, the CM finally divides the little packages into 30 or 40 packages for each of the individual subs. They bid it, they get those numbers in, And then they sit down with the owner and say, well, here are the 30 bid packages. These add up to 58 million. It's gonna cost us $2 million to be out there for 2 years. Our fee is 3% of this, so we're gonna make 1.5 million in profit. And, this is our guaranteed maximum price. So they are kind of at risk at that point, but not really. When I speak on this, I really call it CM no risk. Because while at CM at risk, most of the risk is removed. But the reason that this model is still thought to be beneficial to many owners is that you select the CM based on qualifications. So as you did with the architect, it's the same statute really when it comes to selecting the CM. So you select them based on qualifications. So you would do an RFQ, you would have them submit information about their ability to do this. You would review those and maybe interview 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. And then you would select somebody based on qualifications. So you're not selecting them based on some low cost, and you're able to pick somebody that has a history and a reputation of finishing projects on time, a history and a reputation of doing good quality work. And the other thing that comes out of CM at risk, kind of at the end of the project, and really post-occupancy in most situations, is that because the next job for the construction manager is qualifications based, and when the new owner, prospective owner, calls Hoke and says, well, how did so-and-so do? They want to hear that they did great, right? Because so they do tend to try to make you happy. We do find that most of them are far more willing to come back post-occupancy and deal with the little issues that some don't. Oh, look at how this tile is doing X, Y, and Z. Well, the CM is more likely to come in, look at it, tear it up, put it back down, because they know that when you get the call, they want you to say they were great both during construction and when we had issues come up later. They were there for us too. So, we do find that you get better overall performance by most CMs. There are some that, that have gotten hired and, they're not on my list to rehire. But for the most part, most of them that do this day in and day out, you get good quality work. And they stand behind it. So that's one of the main things that you get there too. I think on a project like this one, where you're going to be occupying the site, moving kids around, maybe tearing buildings down, having the CM work with the architect from the beginning and to think about how some of that's going to happen, to coordinate it in a way that makes more sense than maybe what, Dr. Dallas and the architect may sit around and think, well, this makes sense, but the contractor's like, no, this will make more sense. So having that person involved early on to help work through some of that scheduling on a project like this, I think is really useful. Also, not quite as much here, because I think this is going to be more tear down than a renovation-ish project, but also there are situations where on some of these hybrid projects where having the CM come in and poke a hole in the wall to see what's back there, to be able to know before you get into the construction project. And then you find out, oh, we didn't know that was there. We didn't know this was there. Just to make the process a little cleaner and easier. So there's some of that can come. I don't know, again, because this is mostly going to be a tear down for the most part. So it's maybe not quite as much of that here, but the like. So these are all the reasons why we are recommending that the board seriously consider construction management at risk for this particular project. I think the next couple of slides are some of the other options that are out there available for the owner. We can skip that, I kind of go through those. We can skip that too. Okay, there we go. And this was the slide actually I thought we had earlier, but it was not. So A newer option available to owners now is design build. With design build, what you effectively do is you hire a team, right? You hire an architect and a contractor together. They team together, and you have a single contract with the architect and the contractor to design and build a building. I don't think design build is as useful for most public school systems because the primary benefit in design build is the ability to save some time, right? Because you've got the contract and the architect, and they can just kind of go, and they can start the construction while they're still doing the design because they're working together and they're just and it works well in like a strip mall or, something like that. It doesn't seem to me, or I've seen it, to be as viable an option for schools because you like typically to design it, to see it, to know what you're gonna get, right? Before you start turning dirt. You don't wanna be turning dirt while you're still trying to figure out where the classrooms are gonna be and all that. So by not getting the time savings historically, because you wanna see it first before you start. And the bigger issue for me as the lawyer is that you don't have anybody overseeing the project from your perspective, right? You've hired, a team that is now building the building. So normally the architect would say to the contractor, oh, that's not right, tear it down and fix it. Well, if the architect's tearing down his own work, he or she is far less likely to say, tear that wall down and rebuild it when it's gonna cost the architect now the $500,000 to tear it down. It's not just happening. So you lose that oversight that comes from having the contractor and the architect. You also, you don't have the contractor pointing out where the architect did wrong. All of that can kind of get lost in this commingled group. So it's available. There are times where it makes sense. Charlotte Mack did some design build projects years ago under some special legislation at the time. They did 2 or 3 projects. Mooresville Graded School District is doing a small renovation project using design build. Over my recommendation, but anyway. They're doing it, design build. And we have seen with some ESSER money, school systems doing HVAC replacement projects, design build. It makes a little more sense on that kind of a project because again, we're just taking these air conditioning units out, so go. I mean, but I still think that you lose the oversight that comes from having the engineer and the contractor separate. But at least in those kinds of projects, it makes a little bit more sense to have it be a little bit more turnkey than it would in my opinion, on a building, on a school building. Again, strip malls and other kinds of buildings like that are somewhat fungible. I think it works, but not so much for a school. So anyway, it is an option that's available. You can certainly do it. It will be over my objection, but that's okay. It wouldn't be the first time. But no, it's certainly an option that's available for you if you're interested. Is that it? Oh, these are just advantages and disadvantages. Which we've done. We're not. So if you were going to do design build, similar to the conversation that we're having today about seeing at risk, there's a statutory set of factors that we would have to walk through for you to consider. And as part of that process, you would then choose to go in that direction. So if we later decide that when we talk about some of this here in a second, that no, this is one that you like, then we would probably need to come back and make sure that we check all of the design build boxes that are required for you to use that method. Because the legislature, basically what they've tried to do is, they've said single prime is again, that's the main one. If you're gonna use one of these other options, they want to make sure that you've kind of thought about it and that you've worked through kind of a scenario and you've looked at everything in choosing it. The design build criteria is a little different than the more generic CM at risk criteria, which we're kind of working through today, which is you've looked at them all and then you decided that this is best. Design build has a very specific set of factors that you're supposed to review. And again, if we decide to go in that direction, we would want to make sure we dot our I's and cross our T's. Public-private partnerships are another option that's available. So your Sandy Grove school is as close to a public-private partnership as we've kind of seen, certainly on the school side. Public-private partnerships over time have changed. What is now a public-private partnership has changed from like back when you did Sandy Grove. Sandy Grove kind of started out as a public-private partnership, but it ended up being really just a straight lease. There's a leasing statute out there that got modified about the same time that we were trying to wedge that project into PPP. And it ended up being just a really straight lease for the most part. So public-private partnerships are similar to that, where some developer would come in and basically build the building for you, and you would lease it from them, or some other arrangement that would meet the statutory definition. We're definitely not, that's not even in the cards here for this project. If you were going to do something more like Sandy Grove here, it wouldn't be under this statute. This statute, as it's been kind of rewritten now, it's nearly impossible to apply because it requires the developer to put like its actual cash into the project, so that it does have more of a public component to it than just somebody from the public built your building. So it's intended to now be more of a hybrid, like the city and some developer downtown creates these areas where you're gonna have restaurants and that kind of stuff. It's more the way the statute would work now than the original version years ago. But we're supposed to at least cover it and talk about it, so we covered it and talked about it. And then maybe, yeah, you can skip that one. Yeah, okay, so those are the main methods. Again, we are recommending CM at risk for the various reasons that we discussed, but I'm happy to answer now like specific questions about any of them, and more particularly, obviously, CM at risk, since that's the one that we're recommending.
Did you have any questions about the different methods? We'll have the test in about 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
I have a few questions.
Sure.
But my first question, had to do with the low bidder.
Okay.
How does the public feel or the local government feel when you don't go with the lowest bidder? Do you have any?
So when we bid single prime and we are choosing to go with someone other than the low bidder, we would explain to the board at the meeting why. We check the references on contractor A, they finished their last 3 projects 3 months late. The owners complained about the quality of the work. This, going to the next bidder is gonna cost you another $100,000 on the $20 million project, or now probably what would be, like on your project, let's say it's a $65 million project and the difference is 64.8 or 64.9. And we're telling you that the 64.8 person has finished late, they've had all kinds of issues with them. And for an extra $100,000, you can go with somebody that has a good reputation, they finished their last couple of projects on time. They do really good work. So we have not had any issues there, certainly with the board or with the public. We have had a couple of situations where the disgruntled bidder has filed a lawsuit. But the statute is overwhelmingly, and the case law supporting it is overwhelmingly in your favor. Effectively, the standard is fraud or an abuse of your discretion. So what you basically would have to show, and this is what these cases go nowhere, is that the contractor would have to show that, somebody put money in Deb's pocket, to choose somebody else, or, and your other staff member, has got that $100,000 in a suitcase somewhere, and unless you can show that, then it's just a blatant abuse of your discretion, and you've got lots of discretion in these matters, and as long as we build a record, which is, we're not choosing this person because they did X, Y, and Z. And we also would typically have, in this case, like Dr. Dallas, send a letter to the person that would say, look, staff's not inclined to recommend you for this project, but before we go forward, we'd like to meet with you to talk about it. And, we'd say we've got these concerns, and then they explain their answers, and assuming their answers don't satisfy her, then she would bring the recommendation forward. And all those steps we take to make sure that, one, if that lawsuit gets filed, we can say, no, this was not, and if you look at all of the process that we did here, and unless you find the money in this car, we feel pretty good.
So in other words, you would give us the ammunition
Yes.
that we need.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
Thank you.
And it is the process that is used on, I would say, nearly all projects. It is still the predominantly used process. It's just that certain projects, and I'll be honest, there are times, we have some clients that I think overuse CM at risk. They're gonna build a brand new elementary school that they built 3 times before, and, and the only difference is it's on a new site. And no, I think those are the kinds of projects that you could just bid. At that point, you built it a couple times, you know what you're doing now. So why not bid it and just let the low bidder? But I would still, in that situation, want to be careful about, the rejection of a bad bidder. Because you don't gain as much from CM at risk after you've built it a couple of times, because a lot of that collaboration between the architect and the contractor is, you don't need it. You don't need it. It's gonna be on a brand new site that's whatever. There's just nothing to it. This job, on the other hand, is a lot more complicated because you're doing it on an existing site. So this one does actually, because I'm somewhat jaded about the use of it, but this is one that I would have no trouble and am recommending it just because of the complexity of this particular project.
I knew when I was in county government, we always got 3 bids. They always wanted to give the lowest bid, but there was a few times I had to tell them why I couldn't.
Right.
Like I should give the lowest bid.
Right,
So just like you said, that's the way you do it.
Right, and just to keep in mind, sometimes, one thing to note that even though with CM at risk, you would select the CM based on qualifications and not based on low bid, the CM does have to publicly bid all of the work, right? So all that work does get publicly bid. All your local people get a chance to bid on that work. So all of that occurs. In our contracts, we require them to get 3 bids, even though the statute doesn't require that. The contract requires them to get 3 bids. Now, if they can't get 3 bids after they've tried a couple times, then obviously we go forward, but we do otherwise, encourage them or try to make them get 3 bids. So. Oh, and the other thing, for some boards that you get out of CM at risk that you don't necessarily always get in single prime bidding is higher MBE participation. So you get higher minority business, local business, small business participation because of the manner in which the CMs spend time recruiting and all those things that occur, because they've got all this buildup to it. It's not like they get a set of documents and then they got a month to put a bid together. They got months to work with the contracting community, et cetera, and to drum up interest. So you get much higher MBE participation, or higher anyway, MBE participation that way. The other thing that you find with CM at risk is that the subcontractors have to be pre-qualified. So there's a pre-qualification process that occurs for all the subs. And this would be one of the reasons why some people would say CM at risk is maybe a little bit more expensive, is that you're using pre-qualified subs instead of who just might submit a bid on a given bid day. And the GC may not even know the person, but they've given a good low number and they just grab it because they know they're gonna be competitive. So by screening the subs, it may cost you a little bit more on the cost side, but it also ensures that you got better quality of people, historically anyway. So that's another reason why those projects, in most situations, tend to turn out better. I mean, there's always, again, there's the occasional bad CM, or some projects just, even with a good CM, go sideways. But most of the time, you're gonna get a better result.
Any other questions? It's a lot. It's a lot of information.
Well, so if this were something that you're interested in, again, you don't have to decide today unless you want to, well, you don't have to decide today regardless, but you would want to decide sooner than later if you're going to do CM at risk, because you'd like to get the CM working with the architect as soon as possible. If you're not going to go in that direction, then you can punt this, and you can even decide it, down the road. You just will lose some of the benefits of the process. But even if you decide later, you still get the benefit of selecting the contractor based on qualifications, instead of having to deal with, low bids, so.
Yeah, so that's kind of the conversation we could have. So either today, we can make a recommendation to approve one of the methods, or if we want to agree to say, hey, we're not ready yet, let's come back at another meeting, discuss it, make a vote. So there's a couple of different ways we can do it. I mean, I kind of am somewhat inclined to say, let's try to move forward at this meeting if we can. Because like Rod said, it does give us then the benefit of keeping the process moving, which we're all learning how long this process does seem to take, because of the timelines and timeframes. But I mean, we can go either way. I mean, we can make a recommendation, and if I make a recommendation for approval, it would be for CM at risk. That's kind of where I'm landing right now after discussion, laying out the pros and the cons. And I do think because of the uniqueness of the project, because of what we're trying to do, we don't have a blueprint building to say, here, throw it on and this is how it's done. We are really trying to do something different to position it while we're doing other things, that I do think it would be very beneficial to have that contractor working with the architect somewhat simultaneously to say, no, it doesn't need to be positioned like that.
Right.
No, maybe we can save that building over there if we, realign it here. That collaboration, I think, up front would help us, I think, build a more efficient and hopefully more cost-effective building. So I'm just open for discussion where you guys, if you want to move forward today and take a vote, or if you'd rather just hold off.
And let me just say two real quick things on that. So one, ultimately, we got a resolution that we've used in some other places that we would want to draft and have you approve at a meeting if you were to agree to go in this direction. You don't have to do that today, but if you were to say today, yeah, we're inclined to do this, we get you that resolution and you can approve that at a subsequent meetings. We need to approve it in my mind before you actually select the CM, so you've got a little time. Also, if you decided, yeah, let's at least put our toe in the water and do an RFQ, you can do an RFQ, get the proposals in, and that the board interview the architects?
So we had two board
Okay.
members that sat in on
Okay.
those architects.
And you can do that similarly here, or maybe the whole board, because this is a little different. You know, you may all want to have them come give their presentations and hear from them about what they do and why they think that this is a great method, and hear from them directly. And then decide at that point, because again, if you decide to go single prime, you don't have to make a decision, that's just gonna kind of happen. And you can, you know, but this, if you're gonna go in this direction, the sooner you decide, the better. You could say, well, let's at least put out the RFQ, narrow it down to whatever number, have them come make a little dog and pony show about what your project and what they think and how they're gonna help you and why they're gonna, you know, why they're better than sliced bread and all this stuff. And then you can decide if any of that makes sense to you at that point. And then that's when you would literally make a decision about whether to go in that direction or not. So that's another option that's available.
Okay, if we did, what you just suggested, how much time are we adding to the project?
You're not really adding any time because the architect's design is driving everything, right? I mean, that's what's the time. So, and Robbie and his group, they're already kind of working. So it's like, if you're gonna do this, the sooner you get this group involved in working with Robbie, the better, if you're gonna do this. But this won't delay the project because Robbie's work is really at this moment, the critical path, so to speak. Yeah, so you could theoretically do this, and I mean, I've got sample RFQs that I could get to the superintendent. You know, if we didn't have it posted this week, we could definitely get it posted next week. And I've got a list of 10, 12 CNs that I recommend that you send it to, that I'll get her the email addresses, and then, yeah, I mean, you would just go forward.
Does that work for you, Madam Superintendent?
So I just want to make sure that I understand. So today, what we would do is not actually identify that we're gonna select CM at risk, but almost proceed as if we are. And then as we put out the RFQ to those
Right.
contract, that basically they would come in after we needle it down to 2 or 3. They would come in and kind of make the pitch of why that works with
Right.
CM at risk, or.
Yeah, I mean, right, or, I mean, you don't have to do that part. I mean, so if you are convinced that this is the way to go, then you don't, well, let me say it a different way. I guess what I'm saying is that to some extent, even if you say you're gonna go CM at risk, you're not bound by that decision until you sign a contract with the CM. So you could decide today, yes, we at least want to explore this, let's start the process, right? And before you hire the CM, we would do that resolution in which we dot our i's and cross our t's to make sure that you've done everything right to choose CM at risk, and then you would choose the CM. But you've got time, you don't have to literally decide today that you are absolutely doing CM at risk. You can see how the interviews go. You may say, I'm not impressed. And then, you know, you can just bid it. So you've got those options.
So anybody,
But you have CMs that you can recommend,
Oh, yeah, I've got a list of,
and some that you won't recommend.
yeah, I will not let you choose someone that I think would be a bad
Right.
choice for you. I would not let you do that.
so let me go back and clarify that second option would be today to go ahead and say, we're going to go with CM at risk. Go ahead and put out the RFQ, still interview, but if at some time during that process, we're like, this is too much, or we don't wanna go this way, we can always come back as
Yeah.
a board and say, based on what we've seen, we'd like to revisit, and we're now gonna make a recommendation to go back to design build or whatever.
Correct. You can go back to single prime, you would never go to multi-prime, but you could do single prime. You really wouldn't do design build either, I mean, on this particular project, but you could basically, you could go back to regular single prime bidding.
So I mean, what I'm inclined to do would be to go ahead and try to do this today, if everyone feels comfortable with that. If not, I have no problem pausing and going the other way. But if we want to go ahead and try to identify that we're gonna try to pursue, we're gonna approve the CM at risk, and then we'll start that process, knowing though, if something is unsettling with us, we can pause and we can always come back.
Correct.
I think that does kind of keep us moving somewhat.
Yeah,
Because I do know even when we interviewed some of the architects,
right.
they kind of ask, have you guys decided, are you going CM at risk? So they kind of like to know that, I think, too, somewhat, moving forward. So, that would be my inclination, is to go
I
ahead
think that's.
and then we kind of proceed. But if anybody else has any other questions or wants to pause and do the RFQs first and come back, we can do it that way.
I have a question, so, once we move forward and you recommend a couple of the CMs.
Right.
Will, as a team, will we all be able to sit in?
Yeah, we can do that. That's basically however you,
Okay.
Chair, want to decide how to do that.
Yeah, some boards, the whole board would interview CMs, because it's such a unique process that you don't do often. I mean, I think with architects, everybody's had an architect before, so you just, whatever, bring a couple names in and you go with it. But I think CMs are a little different, especially your first couple, I could see the whole board wanting to sit and hear it. Because I mean, it's educational to have them, they'll come in and they'll know enough about the project that they'll try to, show you how far ahead they are. Look, we already got some ideas here and there and blah, blah, blah. And they'll bring their team of people that they will tell you anyway, are gonna be on the project, and you'll kind of meet the people and can ask them. So it's a good process, and one that, it's a big, $60+ million contract. I mean, so, the whole board ought to sit and talk about it and see it, it's not a small contract. And it's gotta be a 2-year project, so I mean, it's a big deal, so.
So, you want to go ahead and try?
Yeah, I
So is
think we-
everyone okay with, so I will
Yeah,
just
the
clarify,
recommendation.
right, that we'll go ahead and ask for approval of CM at risk. We'll go ahead and start the RFQ process. Once we do that, and we can decide whether you want me to needle them down to 2 or 3, or if the board wants to help needle that down, but when it gets time to do the actual selection, we'll interview as a whole board.
Yeah, I would think that you would, the superintendent, maybe a couple of board members, a couple of staff people needle it down to
Yeah.
whatever, and then, I mean, because again, as long as I make sure that you don't have a bad person, then it really doesn't matter. I mean, there's some that are better than others, but then there's some that you just don't want to use.
Yeah.
So as long as those people aren't on the list, then wherever you land will be fine.
So I think, Madam Chair and members, then I think I would like to ask for approval to select the CM at risk method as we move forward.
To at least begin the CM.
To at least begin
Yeah.
the CM at risk process.
Yeah.
Right.
You heard the request from our superintendent, Sheila, for us to, she has recommended that we approve the beginning of this election for the CM at risk process.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the process of the CM at risk.
That's good.
A second.
Okay. May we get it has been moved and seconded that we approve the CM at risk selection, the process that's been submitted by our superintendent. Are there any questions? If none, all in favor, let it be known by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. So it's been approved.
So just thinking timeline wise, real quick, just kind of big picture, since we got everybody here. Get an RFQ out, let's just say early next week. Give people 2-ish to 3-ish weeks to respond, so we're, end of May, let's say, something like that.
Let's
It's more like in the beginning of July.
Okay.
May, June.
June.
All right, say early
Beginning of
June. And then that gives you, maybe a weekish to review them and to narrow them down, and then you probably want to notify and give them like 2 weeks to interview, because again, they're gonna want to put their little dog and pony show together and come in, yeah. And then come in and try to woo you, so, something like that, so end of June-ish, making a decision somewhere in there.
I like that.
Feel good with that?
Oh, yeah, the day's actually the 11th, so yeah, end of June for sure, yeah, I don't know what I was thinking, yeah. Sorry, I was thinking it was like May 1st. This month's flying by, yeah, so that'll work, so I'll get you, I may go ahead and send you something that's a little more tailored for this instead of just a generic one, and then you can just tweak it from there, all right?
All right. And same posting requirements online,
Yes.
email.
Yeah, on your, the main thing is getting it on your website, and then you'll email it to the group that I'll send you.
Okay.
If you want to put it in the newspaper, you can, some people do, just, but I don't think people find stuff in the newspaper anymore like they used to.
All right.
Anything else?
Any other questions? I think that's all we have.
All right,
Okay.
Rod, I'd like to say, we have used you in the past.
yes,
Yes, we have.
yes,
We were happy with your recommendations.
okay,
So I was really comfortable, like, going with what you recommended today.
well, thank you,
I just thought I'd let you know that I was comfortable.
well, thank you. All right, well, I'm happy to help, and knock on wood, this one will be as successful as the last one, so.
Thank you,
All
Rod.
right.
Thank
And
you.
you got my number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
But we are down to, continue to adjournment, and at this time, maybe you have a motion.
So moved.
It's been moved in second, that we adjourn to our next meeting. And then questions?
Who was the second? You?
Yeah, it was me. We were doing it at the same time, but then I seconded.
Oh.
Okay, I said it's been moved in second, that we will adjourn to our next meeting. Are there any questions? All those in favor, let it know by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes have it.